I never believed a single moment could unravel the world I had built with someone I deeply cared for, yet that is exactly what happened in the still hours of a late night. A phone rang, and in seconds, everything I thought I understood about love, trust, and devotion collapsed under the weight of a horrifying truth. The person I loved had weaponized intimacy with someone else to make a point about how neglected he felt. The shock hit me like a physical blow, leaving me gasping for breath and questioning everything that had once felt solid in my life. I stood alone in the hallway of my university library, trembling fingers clutching my phone. My friends, immersed in their own frantic late-night project preparations, called out to me asking if everything was okay. None of them knew that, on the other side of that phone, the man I considered my partner was actively betraying me, live, visceral, and deliberate. This is the story of how I fell in love with a charming, talented man named Brandon, only to discover that beneath his caring exterior was a capacity for cruelty so deep it nearly destroyed my sense of self. Yet every wound has a story to tell, and every betrayal can be the catalyst for transformation. What began as a late-night phone call that ripped my heart open soon became the impetus for rebuilding my life, recognizing my self-worth, and understanding the subtle traps that form when love turns into control. Brandon and I crossed paths during our sophomore year at VL University, where I majored in graphic design, and he pursued architecture. We first met when our respective departments collaborated on a visual spaces seminar. While he marveled at the structural integrity of design, I was fascinated by color theory and layout aesthetics. Our shared passion for creativity made every conversation lively, weaving ideas of angles, shadows, typography, and composition into a tapestry of new possibilities. In those early days, the simplest activities felt imbued with magic. Late afternoons found us sipping cheap campus coffee while sketching out dream projects. He envisioned modern cathedrals drenched in light. I dreamt of sprawling digital art exhibits that blended technology with raw emotion. I remember thinking we complemented each other's strengths. My eye for color, his obsession with structural harmony. It felt like discovering a kindred spirit, someone who not only understood my creative drive but also fueled it with his own. Little did I know, the very qualities I found so endearing, his steadfast beliefs, his seriousness, his deep conviction, could also morph into instruments of control. The very synergy that drew us together would later become the battleground where he'd test my independence and ultimately push me to a breaking point. Brandon also came from a devout Catholic background. He spoke often about the guiding principles of his faith, his desire to wait until marriage to fully explore intimacy, and the importance he placed on modesty. At the time, I found it refreshing that he was so open about his moral compass. Growing up in a more lenient household, I had never encountered such unwavering convictions, so I viewed it as a unique insight into his world. He told me about his family, who held firm rules about curfews and personal conduct. The stories of his structured upbringing were new to me, sometimes fascinating, sometimes intimidating. It wasn't long before I noticed small warning signs that disrupted our harmonious bubble. An offhand comment about my outfits, he would say, "You might attract the wrong kind of attention dressing like that," surprised me, though I'd shrug it off, thinking he was simply worried for my safety. Sometimes, if I was hanging out with friends, especially male friends, he'd send texts that initially seemed affectionate but carried an edge. "Miss you, hope you're okay. You haven't forgotten me, right?" The concern felt sweet until it happened over and over, intensifying whenever I spent more time away from him. At first, I barely registered these as red flags, convincing myself that Brandon was just protective. He frequently reminded me that, in his family, closeness meant genuinely caring about one another's every move. But a subtle pattern emerged. The more I focused on my creative projects, the more uneasy he became. My classmates and I would stay late on campus, hashing out ideas or refining designs, and I could feel him chafe against the idea that I had a life independent of him. He seemed to struggle with a partner who was deeply invested in something that wasn't about building a future together in the precise, traditional sense he envisioned. With hindsight, it's easy to see how each small sign was a clue to the bigger storm brewing under the surface. Back then, though, I was too enamored by our initial spark to confront the possibility that he was sowing seeds of distrust and control in the name of love. It was the second semester of that same year when the 50 Specimen Shapes project became my all-consuming focus. Our professor challenged us to conceptualize and create an array of 3D shapes, blending geometric and organic forms while integrating digital and physical mediums. Everyone in my group was buzzing with excitement. This wasn't just for a grade. It was our chance to push boundaries and showcase what we could really do. As the deadline loomed, the team decided on an all-nighter in the main campus library. The plan was to combine our resources. John had a knack for rendering realistic shadows in 3D programs. Anna specialized in color balancing, while I orchestrated the overall thematic consistency. We were determined to craft something spectacular. In the days leading up to the final push, I tried explaining to Brandon just how vital these collaborative sessions were. Rather than celebrating my dedication, he fixated on the idea of me spending an entire night away from him. Alarm bells should have rung louder in my mind. His constant questions about who would be there, how long exactly we'd stay, whether any partying might ensue made me uneasy. It felt like I was answering to a suspicious parent rather than sharing my excitement with a supportive partner. Yet, I swallowed my frustrations, hoping he would come around once he saw the final creative vision. The night itself brimmed with tension and unspoken conflicts. I sent him messages throughout the evening, quick updates like, "We're still at it, can't wait to show you the final product," or, "Wish you were here, but I know you'd be bored with all the coding talk." Each time, his responses grew colder, short texts that felt like they were coded with subtext. "All right, be safe. We'll talk." Something about that last message, "We'll talk," made me shiver with a sense of impending doom. Yet I pressed on, determined to finish the project. Around 4 or 5 in the morning, our group was operating on adrenaline and caffeine. The library's overhead lights hummed, illuminating our scattered blueprints and half-empty coffee cups. I was bleary-eyed yet elated, checking the final rendering on my laptop when my phone buzzed insistently. It was Brandon. Something in my gut twisted. He hardly called so early. Maybe he was just worried about me walking home in the dark, I thought. I answered, speaking in a whisper so as not to disturb my friends. Immediately, I heard sounds that made my blood run cold, moaning, gasping, the distinct noises of people engaged in a deeply intimate act. My brain refused to process it at first. I stammered, "Brandon, what's going on, Brandon?" But then he spoke in a low, breathy voice, "I want you to hear what you've been missing." My entire body went numb. Shock, embarrassment, and horror collided as I realized he was not alone, someone else was with him, and he wanted me to know it. No matter how I try to describe it, nothing quite captures the visceral jolt of learning that your partner is actively betraying you, and doing so with the intention of causing maximum psychological damage. I felt tears burning at the corners of my eyes, my throat constricting as though the very air had turned toxic. The final dagger was his chilling statement. "Maybe now, you'll know how it feels to be left out." Then the line went dead, leaving me in silent devastation. I must have stood there for a long moment, phone still pressed against my ear, unable to move. The library hallway, so familiar and safe mere minutes before, now felt like a nightmare corridor. My teammates' laughter from the other side of the door sounded distant. When I finally managed to stumble back in, Anna took one look at my ashen face and sprang up, leading me outside. I couldn't find the words to tell her what had just happened. All I could do was hold up my phone, tears rolling down my cheeks. Anna and John insisted on walking me home, the rest of our group offering quiet comfort. My mind whirled with questions, each more disorienting than the last. Who was the other person? Why would he do this? Could I have prevented it by not staying out so late? I sank into the couch in my dimly lit apartment, the sun just beginning to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in surreal tones of pink and orange. Dawn had never felt so cruelly ironic. Life was carrying on as usual, while my world had turned upside down. I reached for my phone, half hoping to see a text from Brandon that would clarify everything. Maybe some twisted explanation that wasn't as awful as it seemed. There was nothing. In the silence of that pre-dawn hour, Anna sat beside me, her arm gently resting on my shoulder. She spoke in hushed tones. "This isn't your fault," she said. "He's punishing you for having a life. That's not love." But I couldn't fully grasp it. I felt guilt, anger, embarrassment, heartbreak, and confusion all at once. The tears came in waves, relentless and scorching. With Anna's help, I reached out to classmates and acquaintances, trying to piece together if this cruel behavior was as sudden as it seemed. To my shock, I began to uncover whisperings of similar episodes in Brandon's past. There were rumors of an ex who dropped out of VL University after an explosive confrontation with him. Others recalled how meticulously he seemed to monitor the whereabouts of his partners, under the guise of caring for their well-being. One disturbing account mentioned how he once confronted a girlfriend at a party, accusing her of flirting with every man there if she so much as shared a friendly laugh. It was speculation, and I'd previously dismissed these stories as mere campus gossip. Now, those rumors appeared in a vastly different light. Each new piece of information gnawed at me, painting Brandon as someone far more manipulative than I had ever dared to imagine. Realizing that the shocking phone call might not have been an isolated incident, but rather part of a pattern, felt like stepping into a realm of psychological horror. The sweet, devout, supportive guy I fell for seemed to dissolve, replaced by an image of a man who used faith as a shield and confidence as a weapon. Yet, A small voice inside me clung to the possibility that there was a misunderstanding. Was I reading too much into gossip? Did these rumors have any truth? The only person who could shed light on these questions was Brandon himself. But he maintained his silence for days, leaving me in an agonizing limbo of unanswered questions and emotional turmoil. On the third day, I received a terse text from Brandon. "We should talk." My heart lurched at the sight of his name on the screen, fear mingled with a trace of hope. Perhaps he had come to his senses. Maybe he would apologize. We arranged to meet at my apartment the next evening. The hours leading up to that meeting dragged, each tick of the clock amplifying the tension in my chest. When he arrived, he looked exhausted, but held an unsettling calm in his eyes. We stood in the living room, the silence crackling like static electricity. I asked the question that had been haunting me since that phone call. Why did you do it? His lips parted, but no immediate answer came. Instead, he paced around the room, his expression a mix of resentment and hurt. At length, he muttered, "You always put your friends, your projects, your own interests above us. I needed you to feel what it's like to be ignored." That single sentence solidified the depth of his twisted logic. He had carefully planned to inflict as much emotional pain as possible, all because he felt neglected or insecure about my independence. This was not the apology or explanation that might salvage our bond. It was the final blow that severed any hope of reconciliation. Instead of remorse, I saw blame. Instead of repentance, he offered the justification of a man convinced he was the victim. Anger flared within me. I demanded to know if what I had heard about his previous relationships was true. He bristled, accusing me of listening to rumors. He insisted he was just a faithful man with strong morals, and if certain exes couldn't handle his standards, they had twisted the narrative against him. My stomach churned as I heard the duplicity in his words. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand how a faithful man could orchestrate such a vile betrayal. Another part felt drained, too exhausted to keep this confrontation alive. That night ended with me asking Brandon to leave and never come back. Through tears, I told him that he'd crossed a line so severe it couldn't be undone. He stormed out without a word, slamming the door behind him, leaving me trembling in the aftermath of rage, sorrow, and a strange sense of relief. The decision felt final. There was no going back to the version of us that existed before that phone call. Over the following weeks, I leaned heavily on Anna, my sister Leah, and a few trusted friends who saw me through every tortured sob and anxious confession. I scheduled an appointment with a campus counselor who helped me label Brandon's actions for what they were: psychological and emotional abuse. Hearing that term was jarring, but it also validated the depth of pain I had experienced. It wasn't my imagination, and I wasn't overreacting. I had been subjected to a form of cruelty designed to destabilize me and question my worth. Through therapy, I came to understand that love grounded in control is not real love. It's a perversion of affection that thrives on power imbalances. Recognizing this was both heartbreaking and empowering. If we never name abuse, we leave ourselves vulnerable to its continued effects. As the haze of immediate heartbreak lifted, I channeled my raw emotions into art. My final project for the semester, ironically, was a digital collage series that symbolized shattered illusions. Each piece featured fragments of phones and broken glass superimposed over references to cathedrals, a nod to Brandon's architectural interests and the religious imagery he often used to justify rigid expectations. Working on those collages was cathartic, allowing me to process betrayal visually and shape it into something meaningful. My professors noted the raw emotion in my pieces, praising the vulnerability and power that flowed from each image. In sharing my story with classmates, I discovered that I wasn't alone. Several people confided their own experiences with controlling or toxic partners who masked their behavior with moral or emotional appeals. Some had endured incidents eerily similar to mine, though none quite so brazen as calling during a betrayal. Knowing I wasn't alone softened the sting of shame that had lodged in my heart. We formed an informal support circle, checking in on each other, ensuring that no one felt adrift in a sea of heartbreak. Looking back on it now, I see that phone call as both the worst and most revealing moment of my relationship with Brandon. It exposed the brutal lengths he would go to when he felt threatened or slighted. The illusions of him being a patient, honorable partner fell away, replaced by the clarity that I deserved better, that no amount of affection could outweigh the damage of intentional cruelty. Ultimately, Brandon's betrayal served as a turning point, a pivotal event that forced me to examine my own values and emotional boundaries. Though the pain lingers and echoes, like a phantom ache that occasionally visits my quietest moments, I have chosen to view it as a catalyst for growth. I learned that nobody has the right to micromanage your freedom or punish you for living a fulfilling life outside the relationship. I learned that subtle signs of control, if left unchecked, can evolve into shocking acts of vengeance. Most of all, I learned that trusting myself, my instincts, my worth, is essential, because ignoring red flags in the name of love can lead to unimaginable heartbreak. This story is not just about betrayal. It's about resilience, self-discovery, and reclaiming one's voice after an act of profound humiliation. Every tear shed, every moment of confusion, and every confrontation I endured brought me closer to understanding my own strength. As I continue my creative journey, my artwork carries fragments of that night, jagged edges of glass symbolizing betrayal, luminous shards representing hope, and the faint outlines of cell phones alluding to how technology can be wielded for cruelty. Life goes on, and I've started to glimpse a brighter horizon. Friendships deepen. My understanding of healthy relationships sharpens. Through this harrowing experience, I emerged more grounded, more aware of what I will and will not tolerate in the future. To everyone who has ever felt the sharp sting of betrayal from a partner, or found themselves questioning whether they deserve respect and consideration, you do. Betrayal, especially when carried out with intent to shame or humiliate, is a clear sign that love has been corrupted into something darker. Walking away is not just an act of self-preservation. It's a statement that your dignity is worth more than another person's insecurities. No matter how bleak it seems in the moment, heartbreak can be a powerful teacher. In the shambles of shattered trust, we often find a hidden reservoir of resilience. Take each tear, each tremor of disbelief, and refashion it into a stepping stone toward a stronger, wiser version of yourself. If my story resonates, or if you've noticed familiar warning signs in your own life, know that help and understanding exist among friends, family, counselors, and within your own capacity to rebuild. Thank you for staying through this entire journey, from our starry-eyed beginnings to the bitter phone call that exposed unimaginable cruelty. May my story stand as proof that even the most shocking betrayals can lead to clarity, independence, and a fiercer grip on our own identities. If one person recognizes controlling behavior sooner and steps away from it faster because of what they read here, then all of this pain will have served a purpose. Ultimately, no heartbreak is so deep that it can extinguish the fire of self-worth entirely. Each of us possesses the power to rise, to reclaim our dreams, and to set boundaries that preserve our emotional well-being. If you are ever faced with a partner who tries to cage your spirit or punish you for living freely, know that you can walk away. And in walking away, you don't lose love, you reclaim the love you should always have given yourself.